Now, live from the WVOX studios, it's a special edition of Interview with Bill O'Shaughnessy. Insightful and provocative conversations with notable guests from Westchester and beyond, making a difference. Now, here's Whitney Media President and Editorial Director, Bill O'Shaughnessy.
This is Bill O'Shaughnessy. I think you're going to like this one. I interview so inartfully, awkwardly, and imprecisely, as you well know. Today we're talking with a master interviewer. I've been interviewed by him. His name is Jim Campbell, James Campbell, and he comes from a Connecticut station. He's up in Vermont. He's in a station near Yale. He's all over New England, and he's written a book. And you won't believe, where'd you get the idea for doing a book out? What's that guy's name?
I think it's Bernard L. Madoff.
Yeah,
People may have heard of him. Bernie Madoff.
I love it.
Biggest Ponzi scheme in history. And I'll tell you how it happened. I was doing an interview with a woman that wrote a book that Andrew Madoff, who was his son and girlfriend, cooperated with. So I said, before you come on, can I interview Andrew, which would be off the air because he couldn't talk.
This is the son.
This is his son, Andrew, who was the younger son. The other son committed suicide, and Andrew died of leukemia. But so we spoke on the phone off the air, and I said, I think so far that you're innocent. And he said, and then we're going to be live tomorrow. I asked him some tough questions, which he answered off the record. And then the next day, I said, I'm going to say on the air that I think you did not know. And he says, I'm going to listen to see if you do that. And I did it. And then he introduced me to his mother, Ruth, who I became friends with. Mm-hmm. And then Ruth introduced me to Bernie in prison. And that's how this whole thing...
you visited him in prison?
I have not visited him. I have 300 pages of communications. And I have the most extensive media relationship with him, is how he describes it. And he's a brilliant guy. And unfortunately, the more that I'm, I had done research on the book, a lot of what he says hasn't turned out to be true.
Bernie Madoff. When is this book coming out, Jim?
The earliest it'll be out will be mid-2020.
And what's the title?
It is Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Truth Behind the Biggest Ponzi Scheme in History.
Tell me about Bernie Madoff. You've exchanged a lot of, his family. Was he just a bad guy?
He's actually a low-key guy. He's actually comes across as very friendly and personable. The problem with Bernie is that he cannot accept any level of defeat or anything. So he goes overboard on stuff, and that's what led him to do all kinds of nefarious stuff. He had some big investors who actually made much more money than he did over time, and he couldn't say no to them. And I mean, they would literally down to the level of they would call up and say, I'd like this backdated to this. I want this level of profit and this gain, or the other way, I want this loss for my taxes, and all made up. And so what Bernie told me initially was that he lost some money in 1992 because of these guys. Instead of calling them on it, he took the loss and then doubled up on Ponzi money. The truth has ended up, unfortunately, being, since he's in business in the end of the 60s, on that illegal side of the business, there was never any real trading. It was a complete fraud from day one, which kind of boggled my mind.
Jim Campbell, who made money off Bernie Madoff?
The number one guy was a guy named Jeffrey Pickauer, who made $7.2 billion off of Madoff and had to give it all back. But Bernie, never even worth over $1 billion. So there's an interesting thing. Most Ponzi schemes, the guy at the center is making all the money, which tells you that it was not about greed. It's about ego and power and an inability to say no. And the guy let me tell you, unbelievably brilliant mind. The front side of his business was called a market-making business, and what that meant was if Schwab was looking to do trades, they would route them through Bernie's shop. So that Bernie did the order execution and everything, and Schwab had the customer out front. Totally legitimate, totally honest, overboard on Wall Street ethics. And it was like, ends up being like a mafia business. It was like the restaurant out front. And back here, completely illegal.
Jim Campbell, did anybody get their money back from this schemer?
That's a good question, too, because if people look at it two different ways. $65 billion is what was lost based on the last statement. $65 billion. But the way the recovery trustee measures himself is the original investment that people put in was $20 billion. The rest was all their alleged gains, right? So since that gains is phony, they view themselves as, let's get them back what they initially invested. They have gotten back about $13 billion of that $20 billion, of which $7 came from that one guy. But the people that lost the money felt they lost another $40 billion.
I know the late Mario Cuomo of sainted memory was working on getting some of that money clawed back.
That's right. I think that's right. I don't know for who or whatever, but yeah, he was involved somehow.
Didn't the people on the Mets lose some money with that? The Wilpons?
The Wilpons and Saul Katz were who are partners in Sterling Equities, which is where they made their money, the real estate firm. They, interestingly enough, they're very close to Madoff. Their son was in their Wilpon's sons. They had $400 million with Madoff that they were using almost as a checking account because Madoff's returns were fake. They would do stuff like, I signed you to a contract, you have 10 years of future payments, right? They were putting that money, they were paying that money out of Madoff because Madoff was making them 11 to 12% a year. So, in other words, they were paying off contracts from the interest with Madoff until they lost $400 million.
We're talking with Jim Campbell. He's a big-time New England radio guy, colleague. I've admired him for years. He's a great interviewer. How's it feel to have me turn the tables on you?
It's interesting because I had it recently. When I went on the Vermont station, they wanted to introduce me, and they were on. I was on for a full hour live, and he really turned the tables because I was all set to talk about the show, and he says, "Tell me how your parents influenced you, X, Y," and all kinds of questions like these, which I had to come up with off the top of my head. But it is a lot different.
Tell me more about Bernie Madoff. He's sort of receding from. You think your book is going to sell? Do you think people are still interested in this?
It's a good question.
Scallion.
It's a good question. Number one, the story is just so incredible. I think it will always have interest, and I know it pretty well now. Almost every interview I do, I was with the FBI last week. I was with one of the defense attorneys of one of the Madoff's people that was on trial for it. I come out of these, I'm almost blown away because I learned something new in each one. The thing is so massive. One of the things that I'm going to do in the book, and I don't want to spoil too much stuff, there's uncovered stuff. For instance, whisper this money laundering internationally, and hasn't even really been examined.
Where is Bernie Madoff today?
He's in prison in Butner, North Carolina, in a medium security prison.
But that's not a country club.
Not a country club, no. It's not, obviously, maximum security.
Jim Campbell, didn't they just whack his wife and make her give up her jewels and her stuff?
Well, here's what they did to Ruth. They made her, well, Bernie, first of all, pleaded guilty right away under the grounds that they not go after Ruth and that they leave her with some money. So Ruth gave up $100 million and they let her keep $2.5 million. That $2.5 million is gone, some of it to lawyers. Now, that recently she just agreed when she dies, she's going to give up the rest. I guess she's got two small trusts for grandchildren and then whatever cash she has. And I think she's agreed that when she goes, that money will go to the trustee The trustee is the one that does the clawbacks and hands it out.
So does Bernie still advise on money? Is he whispering to his fellow inmates?
Yeah. I wouldn't suggest investing with him. I am told, though, that the inmates respect him because he was so successful stealing people's money, and he's a master manipulator. He controls his environment wherever he is. Andrew, his son, wanted to quit because Bernie wouldn't tell him what was going on. The Ponzi scheme was going on the 17th floor. He had 18 and 19. The 17th floor had locked, card access. None of the employees could get access except for the small 15 to 20 that worked there. Andrew didn't even have access to it. It was all behind the scenes.
Jim Campbell, what do you put on Bernie Madoff's tombstone? Thief, con man? What is he? You know him pretty well. You wrote the book.
I would say that he is a great con man precisely because he doesn't see himself as a con man at all. It's a really interesting question because he was a king of Wall Street. He built, by the way, I don't know if people know this, the NASDAQ, right, which is all the over-counter stuff. He built the platform that automated that. The way that business used to work, it was a pink sheet, and it would have, a stock on it, and you would actually look at the price would obviously be a day old, and then it would list brokers that sold it. You would call them up over the phone, and that's how the business was transacted. He built a computer system that automated that whole thing and ended up stealing 10% market share from the New York Stock Exchange, which was a monopoly basically then. So half of his tombstone would have read a king of Wall Street, very successful, ethic. The SEC used to come to Madoff, this is how good he was as a con, used to come to Madoff to find out what was going on at other brokerage houses because a lot of the stuff is so esoteric they couldn't understand it. So they go to Madoff. FINRA is the regulatory agency for the brokerage business.
FINRA.
Yeah, it's FINRA, Financial Industry Regulatory Agency. Yeah. They would send their freshman class of examiners who would audit the firms to Madoff's firm because it was such a beautiful, it looked like a Hollywood set. He's really an OCD, compulsive kind of guy. You could have no paper left on your desk. Every computer was angled exactly right. It was a black and silver scheme. And, of course, he had the reputation. He was chairman of NASDAQ. So they would actually send their examiners to go to get their orientation from Bernie, which meant they weren't looking too tough at him on the back of the stuff, on the back office there.
Jim Campbell, a lot of bright guys around New York and financial circles. Like, didn't a Mike Bloomberg know this was going on?
See,
didn't the other guys?
It's a good question. There are a bunch of people on Wall Street who knew something was up, that what he was saying he could do was not possible. And what they thought, though, was happening was, remember, he owned that market maker. So he's doing a lot of trades for people. And I don't know if you know what front running is, but it's Bill O'Shaughnessy's put an order in to buy 100 Merrill Lynch, right? That's going to move the price somewhat, right? What he does is jumps right in front of you because he knows you're buying Merrill, okay? And he jumps right in front of you and does a trade for himself, knowing how you're going to impact the market. That's what they thought he was doing, that he was basically rigging his trades. And the funny thing is that front business was totally honest, and there was no trading going on, really. So he wasn't trading through his own firm. He wasn't even trading at all. So people knew that something was up. They didn't know exactly. Some thought front running. And so I've asked these people, well, why wouldn't you turn them in? And
that's a good question.
Yeah, they don't turn them in because, first of all, there's like an omerta on Wall Street, but also they have no incentive to. Number one, if you are what's called a feeder fund, which means you're investing people's money in hedge funds, and I'm competing against you, and I think Madoff is a fraud, I want you to keep putting your money with Madoff because you're going to end up, I'm going to beat you in the market in the long run. And the other reason is if a firm says, I'm turning in Bill O'Shaughnessy because he's doing insider trading, you open yourself up to everybody coming and looking at you, and basically you're causing legal issues you don't want to potentially cause, and you're exposing yourself. The other thing is Madoff was incredibly powerful. And you take on somebody incredibly powerful, there can be risks. And to show you I'm not exaggerating, abroad, there was dirty money going in.
You mean in Europe? Not a girl.
Europe, dirty money. And these are the kind of people that will kill you if you try and expose them. And I'm talking about Russian oligarchs.
Did anybody try and knock him off?
Not. First of all, he was making all that money for them. But you mean after he got caught, he went to prison so quickly. He pleaded. Now, a bunch of people that were taking money, I'm what's called a feeder fund. Bill O'Shaughnessy gives me some money, and I tell him, I'm going to put this with the best hedge fund for you. And it was going to Madoff. A bunch of these people killed themselves because they felt so bad. I lost all your money. And a French noble guy who was basically had all the royalty in Europe invested through him committed suicide. Because he felt, I'm responsible.
Do you sense in all that you've done with him and corresponded with him, talked to his family, do you think he's finally somewhat contrite?
I hate to say this.
Say it. He's missing an empathy gene, okay?
The other thing is he actually believes, remember I said he couldn't say no to people? And he couldn't admit he couldn't lose any trade or any money. He resents a lot of his clients because he made them so much money. They harassed him all the time, and he felt, I made these guys all this money and they're all over me all the time and all these and they're pushing me, and he actually resented it. A lot of the intrusions and pressures he got. Now, publicly he's going to say he's contrite, and he does feel bad, about people losing money.
Does he feel bad? He's in jail in the slammer.
That's another thing that may surprise you. The pressure, I think, was so intense at the end. He's glad to have it off of his shoulders.
Oh my God!
It was just unbelievable. And you remember the only reason he got caught was because the market crashed in 2008. Because if the market hadn't crashed, he'd be in business today.
Wow.
Because people were throwing money at him. I mean, it was coming in. 2 days before he shut down, 48 million came in.
Wow.
Which obviously got lost right away too. What
does it say, Jim Campbell? You're a broadcaster, now an author. What does it say about this country that we almost worship guys who make money?
It's and the next point to there is that we want to believe con men. We want to believe that he could be this wizard, that he could defy the market, that he never lost money, that every year he made money. And part of that blame goes with us because it was too good to be true. And we tend to believe too good to be true. The other thing it doesn't say well about our country, which is part of the themes in my book, which is the regulatory agencies all let us down. There are a lot of investors, mom and pop, who put 30 years of their life savings in, who were not rich, and they thought that the SEC had blessed him. They thought, the FDIC protects your money in the bank. The equivalent in the brokerage business is SIPC, S-I-P-C. And it turns out SIPC doesn't cover Ponzi schemes. So I lost money. Don't I get like the FDIC would do if a bank went bankrupt? So the system let people down too.
What about smart guys like Joe Perella? And I've mentioned Mike Bloomberg, the Solomons. How come they didn't blow the whistle on this guy?
I think they didn't blow the whistle just because it's not really what's done on Wall Street, to turn somebody else. All these guys know all the bad stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And, even these legitimate firms do a lot of sleazy stuff.
Wasn't he, Jim Campbell, wasn't Bernie Madoff promising returns of 15% no matter what?
Yeah.
Everybody else is, I'll give you 3%.
he was towards the end, right? It was 11%. It was 1% a month, basically. Basically, no matter what happened to the market, it was 1%. Now, here's what he did for his big guys. The big guy would send him money, a lot of money, and sometimes help bail him out.
What do you mean the big guy? 10 million, 50 million?
Well, $7 billion was the biggest guy. $7 billion that made with Madoff. But what he was doing for them was, when you're at Ponzi, you have to keep getting more money or you're out. And this guy would sometimes give him money if he was short. So in return, Bernie would give him 30% returns. Where was that 30% coming? From the poor guy over here who'd given him money who was only getting 11. He was taking that guy's money and giving it to him, and then you got to bring in more. So that's a pretty good deal for Pickhower, which is the guy's name.
The book is called Bernie Madoff. Is that what it is?
Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Truth behind the biggest Ponzi scheme in history.
Say again.
Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Truth behind the biggest Ponzi scheme in history.
And it'll be out in about 6 months?
In mid-August. Mid-2020.
Good for you. And you got a high-class publisher, I hear.
McGraw-Hill. Very nice people.
And the author is Jim Campbell.
Very nice. And I hope to be half the writer you are.
Well, I struggle with it. Thank you, Jim Campbell, broadcaster, author, and that should be a hell of a book, Bernie Madoff. All the Secrets. Thank you. Great stuff.